The void stretched endlessly, a cold, silent ocean that had swallowed 1,000 empires and left only dust behind. Out there, in the black between stars, a mind drifted ancient, vast, and weary, known only as Kelzareth to those few races who had survived first contact with it. The entity had existed long before the concept of mercy had formed on the tongues of lesser species. It had seen worlds wither under solar collapse, had orchestrated extinction like an artist working in fire and shadow. And yet, now, Kelzareth floated in stillness before a tiny blue marble suspended in an unremarkable arm of a young spiral. Galaxy, Earth, to the entity's sprawling galactic intellect, this planet should have been nothing, its life forms primitive, its defenses laughable, its languages mere noise. But it had come with purpose, a ritual it had followed across millennia: observe, assess, extinguish, and so it watched. For 3 planetary years, it studied silently, its form invisible beyond veils of perception, embedded in gravity wells and folds of light, unseen by the creatures below. It expected the usual: squabbles, weakness, bloodlust, but what it found unsettled even its timeless psyche. These humans laughed beside open graves. They sang in the rain after losing everything. They pulled strangers from wreckage and wept for things they did not know. Kelzareth witnessed a woman cradle her dying father and whisper stories into his final breath, as if her words could soften death's hands. It watched a man walk barefoot through fire to rescue a stranger's child, and collapse from the effort. It saw the old give up food so the young could eat. Again and again, these creatures acted with a reckless, terrifying tenderness, as though pain was not to be avoided but shared, as though suffering forged connection rather than despair. The entity's protocols faltered. Its equations failed. Empires it had destroyed had built great machines of war, walls of pride, fleets of conquest. But this planetless Earth, they built homes from rubble and painted murals over scars. They wrote songs about falling and getting back up. And worse yet, somehow they kept smiling. Kelzareth had faced resistance before: ships, shields, Armageddon devices. But never a defiance born from compassion so strong it made. Agony a bond, it could not comprehend it. Worse, it could feel it. For the first time in eons, something pulled at the entity, something more than curiosity, something almost like fear. It delved deeper, and as it watched a frail old woman feed birds in the snow while shivering from the cold, it realized the true danger. These humans, they had nothing, and yet they gave everything. They bled for strangers and carried each other. And if that was their nature in peace, what would they become in war? What would a species do if you touched the ones they loved, if you burned their homes, if you hurt their children? The thought echoed like thunder across the void. The entity twitched within its incorporeal shell. It had to understand more. It would not retreat, not yet. There was a specimen, one of them, a human, isolated in the mountains of their northern lands. A man who had lost everything in war, and yet still smiled at the stars. Kelzareth would make contact, disguised, cautious. It would observe from closer range. If it could learn the shape of this madness, this strength, it might decide whether to annihilate the planet or something else. But deep inside its vast form, something alien to it stirred. Something dangerous, not pity, not mercy, but the ache of understanding, the terrifying whisper of connection. For the first time since it had crossed the stars, Kelzareth was no longer certain who the superior species was. And that, more than anything, was the first crack in its ancient armor. Earth, it realized, was not defenseless. It was just dangerous in a language he had never learned to fear until now. Asterisk, 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 the wind in the mountains was a ghost, slipping between pine branches and howling across the cliffside with the soft sigh of memories. Snow lay thick upon the ground, untouched except for the tracks of a man who walked it every morning at dawn. He wore a coat too thin for the cold, boots cracked at the soles, but his back was straight, his pace steady. His name was Elijah Morrow, and he had come to these heights to be alone, not in bitterness, but in mourning, and something more difficult to define. A silence lived inside him, vast and deep, shaped by the war that had taken everything: his family, his friends, his place in the world. He had not screamed when it happened. He had held his wife's hand as the hospital monitors went quiet and the machines sighed their last. He had buried his son beside a lake where they once fished, and afterward, he had simply walked away. Not to escape, but to find something he didn't know he had lost. Elijah noticed the presence before he saw anything, a ripple in the air, a sense of pressure, like the moment before thunder. Animals fled the forest that morning. The birds did not sing, and yet he walked, undeterred, drawn by something he could not name. When he reached the ridge, he saw it. Not a shape, not at first, but a shimmer, a folding of light in the air, like the sky had grown a wound. Then, slowly, it stepped through. Humanoid, but not human. A figure of shifting light and trembling geometry, as though it couldn't decide what to be. Eyes that weren't eyes glowed like dying suns. Elijah didn't move. He didn't raise his hands or fall to his knees. He simply looked at it with a tired, wary calm, the way a man does when he's seen too much to be surprised. "What are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse with disuse, but steady. The thing did not speak at first. Its presence felt like pressure behind his eyes, like something vast pressing against the shell of his mind, curious and cautious. Then words not heard, but understood tumbled into Elijah's thoughts like wind through broken glass. "You are aware. You are not afraid." Elijah studied the being. Not much left to be afraid of. The silence that followed was heavy, thoughtful. Kelzerath, though it did not offer that name, watched the man. It reached gently into his mind, not to manipulate, but to listen. It saw images, a child's laughter, a woman's hands brushing. Paint across a canvas, the orange bloom of fire where there should have been a home. The entity recoiled, not from the pain, but from the way Elijah held it like a relic, not a wound. He did not cling to it, nor did he deny it. He simply let it live beside him. "Why do you endure?" the entity asked. Elijah frowned. "What choice is there?" Then, after a pause, enduring isn't about strength, it's about love. If I stop, their memory fades. And I'd rather suffer forever than forget. The answer struck something deep within the entity, something ancient and silent. In its long travels through the galaxy, Kelzerath had encountered civilizations that clung to logic, to power, to survival. None had ever bled willingly for the sake of memory. None had wrapped their grief in reverence and called it love. It reached forward, not physically, but with intention, offering an image in return, a distant planet burning, a race destroyed. Kelzerath had ended them, yes, but not without feeling their final thoughts, their agony, their screams. Those echoes had never faded. The entity offered this not as confession, but as a test, to see if the man would recoil. But Elijah didn't. He flinched, but not from fear. He closed his eyes and whispered, "They were afraid, weren't they? No one deserves to die in fear." For a being built from silence and extermination, that reaction was incomprehensible. No judgment, no rage. Just a sorrow so honest it made. The entity shuddered. It had come expecting primitive awe or hatred. Instead, it found itself standing before a man who had nothing and still chose compassion. "Are you here to end us?" Elijah asked finally. His eyes didn't plead. They searched out. The entity hesitated. In its mind, a billion probabilities unfolded, a million timelines of devastation. But now there was another path. One it had never considered until this moment. "No. I am here to understand." And Elijah nodded, as if that made perfect sense. He motioned to the ridge behind him. "Then come. It's warmer by the fire, and I have tea. Not much, but it helps." The entity followed, stepping gently into the world of humankind, not as a conqueror, but as something far more dangerous. A witness, and perhaps something beginning to change. The fire crackled softly, throwing amber light across the rough wooden walls of Elijah's cabin. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows, but inside, the room breathed with a quiet warmth that seemed older than the structure itself. Kelzerath sat, or rather, existed in the corner, a distortion in the air that occasionally flickered with form, a silhouette, an echo of motion, something between presence and absence. Elijah didn't look at it directly anymore. He'd grown used to its shape, or lack thereof, and the stillness it brought into a place already soaked in silence. Over days, or perhaps weeks, time had grown soft at the edges. They talked, not always with words. Sometimes with memories, offered gently like gifts, sometimes with silence, thick and sacred, but always with honesty. One night, as frost feathered, the window panes in the fire had burned low. Elijah spoke of the boy. His name was Thomas. He was gentle. Never liked loud noises. He used to line up stones in the backyard and name them. Not like people, though. Like stars. Elijah smiled faintly, eyes far away. Said they were lonely up there. Said giving them names made them less alone. Kelzerath said nothing, but the air seemed to hum with a sympathetic pulse. It reached into its endless memory and pulled forth the image of a dying star in a forgotten system, a place where no life had ever flourished, where the dust of time had gathered undisturbed for millions of years. And yet, in that cold silence, it had once paused, if only for a breathless second. It shared that moment with Elijah, not as spectacle, but as tribute, The man nodded, accepting it as he would a story from a friend. He would have loved that, he said, that kind of quiet, and so the days passed. Elijah told stories. Some were bright with laughter, full of strange human things, spilled coffee, broken bicycles, terrible music. Others ached with the weight of lost friends swallowed by fire and steel, promises broken by war, and still he told them. Because in the telling, there was healing, and Kelzerath listened. Not passively, but completely. The way only something eternal and curious could listen. It began to understand that humans didn't tell stories to pass time. They told stories to bind wounds, to remember love, to make meaning from chaos. To be human, it realized, was to suffer and still reach out, but not all moments were soft. One morning, Elijah collapsed. No warning, just a sudden fall against the snow-packed path leading to the ridge. Kelzerath rushed, if something formless can rush, and found him pale, unconscious, breath shallow. The entity hesitated. In all its long existence, it had never touched a living being with care. Its power was destruction, not preservation. But now, instinct or something deeper moved it. With great effort, it reached into Elijah's failing body, not to manipulate, but to share energy to stabilize. It took from itself a piece of its essence, something never meant to leave its form, and placed it gently into the man's chest. Elijah gasped, coughed, and opened his eyes, and in that moment, something broke. Kelzerath staggered back, or seemed to, and let out a sound that wasn't a sound. It had given too much. Its core flickered, unstable, but Elijah, weak and wheezing, reached up with one trembling hand and placed it on the shimmer in the air. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to." "You are important to me," came the reply, not in words, but in the rhythm of light and warmth. The room pulsed with quiet. Two beings, one fragile and mortal, the other boundless and vast, sat beside a fire that seemed to burn for more than heat. It burned for memory, for hope, for the ache of connection. Kelzerath no longer saw Earth as a curiosity or a threat. It saw it now as a contradiction, brutal and beautiful, cruel and kind. And at the heart of that contradiction was Elijah, a broken man who gave comfort to the star's dot and the nights that followed. The entity began to mimic human things. It reshaped its form, taking on the outline of a man not perfect, but close. It helped with firewood. It watched old movies Elijah played on a dusty projector. It laughed, or tried to. It learned to savor silence the way humans do when words aren't enough. They played chess with mismatched pieces and never finished a single game, but more than that, Kelzerath felt. Not just echoes or data, but the burn of empathy, the hollow ache of shared grief, the fragile joy of connection. It no longer watched humanity from above. It sat among them, even if only beside one man, and that, it knew, was the beginning of something far more dangerous than war.love. ****. The air shifted in early spring, carrying with it a scent of thawing, earth and pine, a hint that the world was turning again despite its scars. Birds returned to the trees, hesitant at first, like old guests knocking on familiar doors. Elijah sat on the porch, the creak of his wooden chair matching the rhythm of wind through the forest. He held a cup of weak tea, steam curling from it like a spirit dancing toward the clouds. Beside him, Kelzerath sat in its adopted form, still ethereal, still pulsing with a shimmer of alien light beneath the illusion of skin, but more solid now, more human. They sat in silence that no longer felt empty but change, like the seasons. Does not ask permission. The first sign came in the form of a sky that bruised too fast. A dark vein of storm clouds twisted into the horizon, but it wasn't weather. Elijah knew that instinctively. The birds knew too. They vanished without a sound, not in panic, but in dread. Then came the sound, a resonance deeper than thunder, not heard but felt, as though the bones of the earth had begun to hum. Kelzerath stood, form unraveling slightly at the edges. "It's them, isn't it?" Elijah asked softly, not looking. Away from the dark horizon, the entity didn't answer. But the silence spoke loudly enough. It had always known this day might come, that its long absence, its deviation from purpose, would draw attention, and now the watchers had come. Not like Kelzerath, not beings of thought and transformation, but judges. Pure logic. No empathy, no deviation. They were not here to observe, they were here to correct. "I need you to understand," Kelzerath said, and for the first time its voice had weight. "What I was before you." Elijah turned toward it, gaze clear, calm. "I've known from the beginning." The entity blinked, or something like it. "How? You never asked for forgiveness, only understanding." He sipped his tea and winced. and monsters don't sit beside a man dying in the snow and share the warmth of their soul. Kelzerath looked away, form rippling with emotion it couldn't name. It had meant to reveal its past slowly, gently visions of dying stars. Worlds stripped clean, races reduced to history. But Elijah had known all along, not through proof. Through feeling. I wasn't sent here for peace, the entity said. I was the edge of the knife. I was to observe and end you. A long pause. Then Elijah chuckled. You're terrible at your job. That drew something like a smile across the entity's borrowed face. I no longer wish to complete it. But they will. And then the truth spilled like stormwater through a cracked dam. The Watchers had detected deviation. A herald had been dispatched. Kelzerath's bond to Earth had triggered alarms older than time, protocols built not for understanding, but elimination. Humanity had passed the threshold, not of danger, but of potential. And in a galaxy built on control, potential was the greatest threat of all. They'll wipe us out, Elijah said, voice flat. Kelzerath nodded. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you're becoming. Your kindness, your pain, it is unpredictable. It inspires rebellion. It cannot be modeled. Elijah stood slowly, the pain in his joints making itself known, but his eyes clear. So we scare them. Yes. He looked out over the valley, the mountains wrapped in shadow. Good. Kelzerath tilted its head. You do not mourn this? Oh, I do, Elijah whispered. But I also understand it. Fear is a wound that turns even gods into butchers. A silence fell between them. Then Elijah turned, his voice sharp. But we won't go quietly, will we? The entity hesitated. You cannot defeat them, they are endless. Then will be the first thing they remember dying for trying. Kelzerath stared. The defiance was not arrogant, not foolish. It was simply resolute. That was the human secret, wasn't it? Not strength in numbers or weapons. Strength in conviction. In choosing to love the world, even as it burned, the entity made its decision then. The cost would be vast. Betraying the Watchers meant unraveling everything it had ever been. But it no longer cared. Elijah had given it something it did not know. It could possess a soul. I will stand with you, Kelzerath said. Elijah nodded. Then let's show them what monsters' kindness can make. In the distance, the sky cracked open with light not of this world. A shape, vast and terrible, began to descend. The judgment had begun. But this time, the earth would answer, and it would not bow. The heavens groaned as the first of the Watchers descended, a shard of impossible metal and seething thought that tore the fabric of sky with a scream no ear could register, but every cell could feel. Birds fell mid-flight. The trees shrank inward, like wounded things. Across the horizon, clouds unmade themselves into streaks of ash-gray silence. Elijah stood at the ridge with Kelzerath beside him, both staring at the colossal structure lowering itself toward the earth, a spearhead of judgment older than civilization, older than fear itself. It hovered with no sound, yet it radiated. A pressure that crushed breath, a cold authority that whispered, you were never meant to exist. Elijah should have felt terror. But instead, he felt something stranger certainty. Not that they would survive, but that they had to try. His heart thudded like war drums in a chest worn thin by grief and age, but it beat for more than survival now. It beat for every name carved into graves across quiet towns, every lullaby sung against the roar of war, every act of kindness given with no witness. Humanity was not ready for war against the stars. But that did not mean it would not fight. The Watcher pulsed, and a voice, not sound, not language, but a command etched into the bones of the world, echoed through the valley. Deviation must be corrected. The anomaly will be erased. The contagion ends here. Kelzerath stepped forward. It shed its human mimicry and expanded, growing impossibly vast, a bloom of fractal geometry and ultraviolet flame. The sky bent around it, reality itself wrinkling at its refusal to obey. But it trembled too. Even at its full might, it knew the truth it could not win. Not against the collective will of the Watchers, but maybe, just maybe, it could delay. Elijah grabbed its arm, or what passed for one. Don't do this alone. You will die, Kelzerath said, voice layered and harmonics both alien and heartbreakingly human. So will you, Elijah replied. And I won't let the last thing you become be a weapon again. The entity stared into the man's eyes. This mortal, with his failing heart and calloused hands, who faced down the gods not with power, but with the soft, unyielding fury of love. Kelzerath did not understand how Elijah could carry so much loss and still offer more. But it accepted it. And in that acceptance, something changed. Together, they stood at the edge of the ridge, where earth met sky and history was being rewritten. Kilzarath reached into itself, tore open its own essence, and poured its memories into the air visions. Of every world it had ended, every cry it had silenced. The sky filled with ghosts, a tapestry of forgotten civilizations, and for the first time, Earth saw the true shape of the enemy, but Elijah, stubborn, gentle Elijah, did not flinch. He stepped forward, arms open wide, and shouted into the storm, "We are not perfect, we are not powerful, but we feel. We bleed for each other. We build again and again and again. And we will never stop." The Watcher pulsed again, brighter. Now, a second structure broke through the sky. A third shimmered on the edge of space. The full execution fleet was coming. Kelzarath turned toward Elijah. "There is one thing I can do. I can burn my name out of the universe. I can blind their eyes long enough for your species to prepare. And the cost?" Elijah asked. Already knowing, "I will cease." The man's throat tightened. Not from fear, from love. From the aching clarity of knowing that someone would give everything for him, not because he was special, but because he was human. "Then I'll go." "With you," Elijah said. Kelzarath blinked. "No, the world needs you. No, you need me." And in that final, defiant breath, the two became one not in form, but in will. Kelzarath folded itself around Elijah like armor made of galaxies. Elijah lent the entity his heart, his soul, the burning defiance that only humans could wield. They rose together, a storm given name and purpose. The sky broke, light poured across the earth like judgment, and into it, they flew, not to win, but to buy time. And in that time, maybe humanity would become something the stars could no longer erase, asterisk time. Dilated as the fused essence of Elijah and Kelzarath rose to meet the execution fleet. It was not flight, not in any physical sense, it was will. Rising through layers of existence, tearing through the lattice of space like a scream of soul and starlight. Earth fell away beneath them, not smaller, but holier, like something fragile. They had chosen to protect with everything they had left. Above them loomed the Watchers, monolithic shapes of logic and judgment, colossal engines of extinction so vast they seemed sculpted from godhood itself. 3 had arrived now, their forms spread across the sky like a crown of doom. Each one carried enough force to unravel planets, to reduce oceans to steam and histories to static dot, and yet Elijah did not falter. His breath was shallow, his heartbeat ragged. But inside Kelzarath's form, he felt no fear, only the weight of purpose, and the heat of every memory he carried. His wife's laugh at sunset, his son's hand wrapped around his finger, the face of a stranger he once helped carry from a burning building. These were not weapons. These were truths. And they burned brighter than any beam of cosmic fire. "Halt." The voice came from the center of the Watcher fleet, a pure command, not shouted but implanted like gravity, like inevitability. "You are the error. You will be unmade. This is justice." Kelzarath spoke then, not as a god, not as an ancient judge, but as a voice trembling with newfound conviction. "No, this is fear masquerading as order." And Elijah, echoing through that voice, added, "You fear what you don't control. But love isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be chosen." The Watchers responded with silence. Then light, blinding, absolute. A lance of quantum entropy speared toward them, unraveling every particle in its path. They met it head-on. Kelzarath poured out its power, not in offense, but in defense, a cocoon of history, of memories, of the billions of tiny kindnesses it had seen across Earth. Children placing flowers on graves. A man building a ramp for a neighbor in a wheelchair. 2 women holding hands after losing everything. These fragments became shields, each one stronger than any alloy, forged in the unbearable gravity of loss and hope. The beam struck, and the sky shattered. Dot color vanished. The world screamed, but the cocoon held Dot inside. Elijah screamed with the force of it. His veins felt like fire, his eyes wept light. But he held fast, whispering to Kelzarath every name he could remember. Every face, every reason to endure, and then they struck back, not with a weapon, but with a message. Kelzarath opened its core, and from within came a wave of everything it had ever seen on Earth. It sent the Watchers, the memories of mothers dying with smiles so their children wouldn't be afraid. It sent the image of a man cradling a wounded animal in a war zone. It showed them lovers burying each other's letters so future archaeologists might know they had existed. It sent them grief, mercy, laughter, pain, beauty, forgiveness. It overwhelmed. Then with humanity, the Watchers faltered. Their formation bent. One shuddered and began to fracture, not physically, but ideologically. In all their calculations, they had never accounted for this kind of resistance. Not from weaponry, but from memory. This cannot be. The watchers roared, but it was. It was. And then Elijah did the impossible. He took Kelzerath's hand, yes, hand. For now the entity had truly become what it had never dared to be, and he whispered, "Let me carry this part." "You've done enough." Kelzerath tried to protest, but Elijah pushed forward. His mortal spirit surged like a star gone nova. He stepped into the stream of unraveling energy meant to erase the planet, and he absorbed it, not as a man, but as a vessel for every human who had ever stood against death and said, "Not yet." He let it tear him apart, but not before he looked one of the watchers dead in its soulless, ancient core and whispered, "You'll never understand us. That's why you'll never win." And with that final, defiant breath, Elijah detonated not in fire, but in light. A light born of memory, of feeling, of infinite little acts of love. It roared across the sky and struck the watchers like a revelation. One imploded. Another screamed in data. The third recoiled dash blinded Dot, but the cost Elijah was gone. Nothing remained, not bone. Not as Dot only the echo of his last heartbeat, etched into the world like a scar made of gold. Kelzerath fell, spiraling back toward Earth, empty, spent, but alive, and the sky once dark with judgment was now quiet. The confrontation was over, but something far greater had just begun. The sky never quite healed from what happened that day. For years after, if you looked closely at the stars just above the northern ridge where the mountains met the dark, you'd see a faint distortion like a ripple where reality had once buckled and then breathed again. People called it the echo. Scientists called it a gravitational anomaly. The few who knew better called it a memory. But Earth spun on, as it always had, indifferent and wounded, and somehow still alive. Kelzerath never left out it no longer. Floated in the great dark between worlds. It walked among the humans, now not as a god, not as a being of fire and light, but as a tall, quiet man with a haunted gaze and a voice like distant thunder softened by snowfall. It took the name Eli, no last name, just Eli, in memory of the one who had chosen to die, not with vengeance in his heart, but love. It lived in the same cabin Elijah had once built, now mended with reverent hands, the walls filled with books and drawings, and old photos rescued from broken frames. The porch still creaked in the morning, and the kettle still sang at dusk. Children came first, unafraid, drawn by the mystery in Eli's eyes and the gentle way he crouched beside injured animals. They brought him broken birds and bruised knees, and he healed both with a kindness that seemed to ripple beyond skin. The older ones came next, veterans, widows, people hollowed out by the wars and the losses that never made the history books. Eli listened. He never offered easy answers. But when he placed a hand on your shoulder, something inside you remembered how to keep going. He never spoke of the watchers. He never described what truly happened in the sky that day, not in full. But he planted trees in Elijah's name, one for every person he saved, one for every moment he carried. A whole forest bloomed behind the cabin, whispering with wind and memory. The trees grew tall and strange, touched by something otherworldly, their leaves shimmering slightly at twilight. They called it the Grove of the Brave. Pilgrims walked miles to see it, not for the miracle, but for the silence. The kind of silence that listens back. Sometimes at night, Eli would sit on the porch and look up at the stars. His eyes would follow the same path to the ripple above the ridge. He would whisper a name, not loud, not grieving, but grateful. And somewhere, in a dimension just out of reach, the ripple would pulse with faint light, like a heartbeat answering. From beyond the veil, the world did not become perfect after that day. Nations still fought, people still hurt each other. But something fundamental had shifted. The story of Elijah Morrow spread first as rumor, then as myth, and finally as truth. Not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he refused to let be destroyed inside him. Hoped that the Watchers never returned. Whether they feared Earth now, or mourned their lost sibling, none could say. But Kelzerath knew. He had once been one of them. He had once believed in sterilized order and silence over chaos. But Elijah had taught him the flaw in that system. The truth that no machine could hold, that love is not efficient, but it endures. That loss does not end a life, it gives it shape. Years passed. One night, as snow fell soft and endless, Eli sat beneath the stars again. He was older now. Not in body, his form obeyed no such rule, but in soul. A little boy climbed onto his lap, the son of a friend. Wide-eyed and full of questions. "Mr. Eli," the boy asked, "is it true you came from the stars?" Eli nodded slowly. "I did." "And did you see scary things out there?" "Yes," Eli said. "I was one of them." The boy frowned. "But you're not scary." "I was." Until someone showed me how to be something else. The child tilted his head. What did they show you? Eli closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered that it's okay to hurt, that it's okay to love anyway, and that there's no such thing as a small act of kindness. The boy leaned against him and yawned. That's good. I think that saved the world. Eli smiled, and for the first time in a very long time, the stars above the ridge shimmered softly, warmly taut, as though someone was smiling back. And so, humanity lived on, not because it was the strongest or the most clever, but because it remembered. And because one man, in the cold of a dying winter, offered a fire to a stranger made of stars, and that was enough.